Okay, yeah, let's get started.
Mhm.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kijin Zhong, and I'm a postdoc researcher in the Urban Information Lab in the School of Architecture at UT Austin. Welcome to our lightning talk series on smart city research. This talk series is funded through the UT Good System project. So we invite the speakers from academia, industry, and the communities to share the research events and the needs related to the smart cities. So if you are interested in the topic, please feel free to visit our website to our past talk and other activities at smartcity.tech.utexas.edu. So for today, we're very excited to have Dr. Haotian Zhong as our guest speaker. He's one of my great friends, met in Texas A&M while we both were doing the PhD studies. Dr. Zhong is an assistant professor in the School of Public Administration and Policy at Renmin University of China. His recent effort in teaching and research focus on centering the justice and equity in all discussions in emerging technologies. He also serves as an associate editor for the Journal of Transport and Land Use. His talk for today is titled at Intersectional Take on the Future of Mobility. So without further ado, yeah, I'll pass the mic to Dr. Zhong.
Okay, thank you, Kijin. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me, and also I'm so excited to some familiar face here, Yefu, right? Okay, so I really appreciate this opportunity to share my recent research, mainly about inequality and also how to use machine learning models to help us interpret it or understand the impact of technology on individuals. So it's an ongoing research. So I have some preliminary results, but it's also good to share with everybody and also get some feedbacks. So for today's presentation, I will mainly focusing on using the intersectional perspective to understand how new technologies, mainly the emerging mobilities, how that will affect people's everyday life. And simply sharing some machine learning models and how to use machine learning models to engage, to interact, to critique the current social theories, and how that will in turn develop better decision tools and also provide some more accurate or more deeper implications for this social implication of technologies. So that will be the main content or idea of this talk. As we all know that, right? Changes driven by technological advances always, right, create winners and losers, right? That does not imply that I against technology, right? So overall, technologies will improve our quality of life, make economy more efficient. But from the history, we know that there will always be someone left behind, right? Due to income, due to social class, due to physical conditions. So that is a really important, significant social problem. And also it's a governance problem, right? So that requires us to respond the call to those problems seriously. As we know that last industrialization, right, creates inequality between the working class and the capitalist. Now again, we're actually facing a similar change and challenging as before, how this new, the so-called artificial intelligence, big data, right, how that will rearrange our social life, right, restructure our power relations between different individuals and between different groups of individuals, So, for example, right, during the COVID-19 period, the digital divide, right, highlights the negative impact of digital divide among various of population groups, right, especially for the older population, right, for them to get into, especially in China, right, they really impose a very strict the so-called screening techniques, right, based on your tribal behavior and tribal spatial ranges, right? So for older population, they're having difficulties in using the smartphone, right? So that prevent them in access to many public spaces. So that's one example in those digital communication tools, right? So, but as if we move to the topic of transportation, right? We see these two pictures, right? A lot of cars and this kind of massive interchanges in the US. Overall, right? Those systems, cars, highway, freeway systems, making the mobility of our society overall, right, increased a lot. However, the more mobile the society becomes, right, the more certain groups are excluded from or disproportionately impacted by the system. So, as if we study, and also if you guys are doing research with Professor Junfeng Jiao, right, his early research, right, food desert, right, also those public transportation desert, really highlights the impact of this kind of inequality between those who have, right, and between those who have not. So now we are facing a new time, right, new era. If from the guideline of making PowerPoint, this is a terrible PowerPoint, right? It's too busy for us to get anything useful from it. But that's the reality, right? This shows the transportation technology is happening right now. It will be overwhelmed for anybody, right? For any individual in the society, right? That's something as an individual, it's hard for us to intervene, right? It's kind of like a digital world is developing without control, and someday in the future will impose on our life, right? We have to live in this kind of digital world without a choice. And the problem is that using autonomous vehicle as an example, right? So the promise of the autonomous vehicle, right, is embedded in the technical centric planning, right? Which people assume that smart solutions, right, will sufficiently handle like social issues or the environmental issues such as climate change. This can be understood as an example what we call the manufactured uncertainties, right? Uncertainties that created by our technical systems, but we don't know. The automated vehicles will, right, if ever implemented on a full scale, will be collectively imposed and become unavailable for individuals, right? That is imposed on our personal life. We don't have a choice, and we will inevitably affected by those systems. So that creating inequalities, right? But how can we approach the inequalities in the era of emerging mobility, right? Especially as scholars, right? For those big tech companies, right? They are profit driven, right? They will pay attention to a lot of areas, right? Whichever will create profit for them. They will not pay any attention for those vulnerable populations. So that responsibility lies on our shoulders. So if we thinking about the philosophy of technology, right? So the human being, right, is usually the classic statement is that we are, as human, we are just a being, right? Being in this world. But if we're thinking about technology, or if we're thinking about planning as a discipline, right? There are so many efforts that we are trying to make to bring this world into something we desire, right? So it's also the one we can, in a condition that movement, right? This kind of technological movement, social movement, that we can seize it and hold of its possibilities, and we can act in a concrete situation, right? So that's what the philosophy of technology calls the projection. So humans not only being in this world, they can projecting their efforts, right, and their movement into this world to change, right, to make a difference for the trend here. In this case, the development of new technologies, right? So to do that, we have to understand the perspective of users and non-users, that is people, right? So if we're thinking about many history of technological development, the user perspective, the social construction of technologies significantly affected how the manufacturers design and deploy products, right? So there are many examples. I will not go into that here, but so the important things we have to highlight here is that we need to understand who are the winners, right? Who are the losers in this kind of development of new technologies, right? So if we look at this picture, that shows the people's personal characteristics, their spatial social context, and their power relations in their social network will affect how technology influence their life, right, in a very complex ways. Maybe we cannot capture in this one figure, but how they interact, how they intersect with each other is very complex. So that brings a methodological issue, right? When we when we do research about inequality, right? We usually focus on the poor, like lower income community, low income people, older population, and disabled people, right? Minorities. It's okay, right? We know that they will be highly likely worse off, right? In all of those development. It's okay, it's true, but it's boring, right? We know that. We do research again to confirm that, right? Okay, poor people will be worse off. Yes, that's true. And older people will be worse off. Yes, that's true. But so more importantly, and also more interesting question is, for example, how older people will be worse off, right? Because there are many types of, many categories of older people, healthy older people, right? Rich older people, poor older people, and older people living with their children, older people taking care of their grandson, right? All of those complex circumstances will affect how they will benefit or how they will be worse off from those technical advancements. So for that, right, complexity, here I would like to introduce, maybe a lot of you guys also familiar with this. Sometimes we call it a theory, sometimes we call it a perspective, and also in the literature there are some general definitions, but all of those definitions can be debatable. But anyhow, a simple definition or a general consensus is that to demonstrate the meaning of intersectionality, that people occupy multiple demographic categories, or people occupy multiple identities, and their identities intersect with each other will produce distinctive effects, right? So the classical statement is that the operation or the experience of a Black woman does not equal to the experience of Black people plus the experience of women, right? There are some quantitative or quantitative differences between these two, right? So we cannot simply assume this part equals additive Black plus woman, right? So this is a key point of the intersectionality, right? So that brings us to methodological challenges, right? So for research on using intersectional analysis, the researchers usually adopt a qualitative method, right? They conduct in-depth interviews to collecting stories or collecting all of those complex informations from people. That's one of the most popular or most mainstream way to do intersectional analysis, right? So because researchers argue that quantitative research, right, they will miss the qualitative differences between different social groups. Right? So there are always something cannot be quantified, right, for people's life, right? So we know that everything we can quantify, they are structured information, but there are so many chaotic information, so many details that are unknown or unable to quantify by researchers. And second is that quantitative method will lose context information. Again, it's all of those details, the local street knowledge will be lost in the statistical modeling, in the coding, right, in the numerical variables. And the third difficulty is also the important here is that previous quantitative methods are model dependent, right? If we use statistical models, right? If we use those econometric models, how we develop those models, right? We first have a theory, right? Then we develop hypotheses, right? That is the relationship between different concepts. That is the relationship between different variables, right? So all of those relationships, interactions, the structure of the models are predefined, right? So that means we have to predefine those relationships to build the statistical models. But what if the reality, right, does not happen in this way as your model, right? So you miss the truth, right? You kind of misinterpret the reality, right? So that's a problem, right? So this is one of the most relevant to the machine learning models problem, right? It's previous quantitative method, they are model dependent, right? So the data generating process, right, in the reality is unknown to us. But if we use statistical models, we have to predefine the data generating process, right, to mimic the true mechanisms behind of those processes. So that's one of the challenging. And the fourth one, also relevant to the machine learning, right, method is the curse of this dimensionality, right? So if we have few data points, but we have a lot of variables, right, the statistical models will not work. And we know that if we adopting this intersectional perspective, that means many various factors will affect how people engage, how people respond to new technologies. So we have to include a lot of variables. But what if we don't have enough data points? And what if the the simple, typical statistical models cannot handle those high dimensional data, right? So that's also one of the key issues. So, okay, there are so many disadvantages of using quantitative method. And theoretically, we prefer qualitative method. But are there any, right, disadvantages of using quantitative method? Yes, right. So here, if we're familiar with quantitative method, we know that we conduct interviews, right? We're selecting a few cases, right? And we go there, visit them, conducting a long time, right? Time-consuming, energy-consuming interviews with them. The problem is that we can only conduct a few, right? And also those individuals are also predefined, because we will miss out individuals who are not known as being marginalized. Right? We may know, okay, poor people, marginalized, older people, marginalized. Are there any other category people we don't know? If the researchers don't know, they will not interview with them. Those people will be classified as others, right? So that's one of the issue for qualitative research. Right? They can only conduct a few interviews. And also we have so many, the golden mine of survey data sets, right? Collected by SAS, collected by MPO, collected by those NHTS data, right? They have so many social economic factors, right? If you don't use qualitative research method, you kind of waste of those data set used for intersectional analysis, right? So here, other researchers and also we argue for that we need both, right? Quantitative and qualitative methods to engage with the intersectional perspective of analyzing new technologies. But the previous conventional method have problems. So the question we are asking is, can machine learning models help? Right. One of the, I think the motivation to use machine learning model is not because it's popular, right? It's not because everybody is using machine learning and it's easy to publish paper. No, that's not the reason. The key motivation, I think, for everybody should be, you see a theoretical challenging, and the properties or the nature of machine learning just seem to fill that gap, right? Happen to address those theoretical challenges here. So that's one of the key motivation for us to use machine learning models. And however, right, there is no guarantee using machine learning model will produce better results than qualitative research. Right? There's no guarantee. However, as like social scientist, right, it's fun, but also it's our responsibility to explore and develop new tools, right? Provide new tools and document new evidence for policymakers. So here, that's the motivation for us to use machine learning models. So how many time do I have, Kijin? How much time?
We have 5 minutes.
5 minutes? Oh, well,
Yeah,
okay.
Go ahead.
So, okay, so that's the background of new technology and the needs for using machine learning models. So one algorithm, right, I found it's really fits to address the intersectional problem is the iterative random forest. The key strength of this method is that it is fast, efficient algorithm built upon random forests that can search for stable and high order interactions. Right. This is how, and also it's data driven. Right. We don't have any predefined structures for the data. Right. It's data driven and it will search for high order interactions. Right. If we recall the description of intersectionality, we see how this method will kind of seems like a good tool to explore the intersectional issues of this new technology, right? So that's how we use this method to the urban mobility transitions using autonomous vehicle as example. So due to the time limit, I was just directly jumping to, I think, two important points here is that if we use intersectional perspective, right, it's a theory-driven research. So our data collection have to based on the theory. So here we collected travel behavior, spatial and social context, and the identities, the personal characteristics, household characteristics, and power relations, right? Because intersectionality is really addressing how the power relation affect people's life. So within home, domestic, right? Within household power relation, intergenerational structures, right? Whether they have a grandparents at home, whether those grandparents will help them or will be a burden for their family, right? And also their social power, whether people are like ask for favor from them, whether they can have some political powers to help other people doing something, right? So those are the key power relation data collection process. So we collected our pilot service data. We found that primarily, right, most of those Chinese people, they have a positive feeling or perception and express their interest in purchasing autonomous vehicles in the future, right? 31% plus 51%. Almost most of them, if they have if they are afford to buy one, they will buy one. Right? So here is the summary statistics, right? Different categories of related to the intersectionality and also detailed variables. But this is just a few of them, right? We have many more variables. But so interesting patterns emerge from this algorithm, right? We found that the importance in the running the models, the most important variable is the attitudes towards the LGBT groups. So we still don't didn't figure out how to explain or interpret this, but this is something unexpected. It shows the importance. I guess it's associated with how open-minded they are, right? They're open-minded to new social phenomena. They probably will be also open-minded for new technologies. So here, the stability score, right, is the key finding here is interactions between different characteristics. So the stability score means this interaction, the structure, how stable they are, right? So it kind of have a causal implication that if you have this kind of variable features and you have this kind of interact structures, that will lead to the preference for autonomous vehicles, right? So although it's machine learning, right, but it by data driven and by using the random forest algorithm, they can successfully finding some interaction patterns and structures, right, to determine how people will prefer the autonomous vehicles, right? So this if related to the intersectionality is that this shows how different characteristics intersect with each other, determined how the new mobilities will benefit or will adversely influence people's life, right? But here again, the finding is still preliminary, right? So we have to refine the variable selections based on theory and based on a lot of other modifications. But here is just something give you a sense how the results will look like. So our next step, right? In addition to refine the model and results of using iterative random forest, right? It's about individual. It's about individual. Next step, we will move forward to understand the context, right? We study planning, we study geography. We all know that context matters, right? Context will affect our behaviors, but we're living in such a diverse context. So I want to go the inverse way of understanding this problem. I'm trying to using this kind of invariant causal prediction to get, right, to find the causal relationship that can be applied to different contexts. That is, those explanatory variables or different factors that will have impact in any kind of context, right? The universal impacting variables, right, from different environments, right? So kind of inverse way of understanding context, right? Before we emphasize the difference between different contexts, but here using this method, we are trying to find the universal impacting variables from different environments, right? This kind of have policy implication, right? We don't have enough policy resources to design individualized, right, very diversified policy for people, for different cities or different regions. So maybe the first step is to prioritize those universal impacting factors, right, in our policy making processes. So that's something, next step, right, in understanding, after understanding individuals, next step is to unpacking the context impact of the new technologies. So that concludes my presentation. Sorry for the over the time. Thank you everybody for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zhong. Yeah, especially for giving until such a late night in China. It was a very interesting talk. And I'll just wait to see if there is any questions from audience. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, actually, I do have a question. Yeah, thank you. So first, thank you,
Yeah.
Dr. Zhong. Yeah, it's a kind of word. But yeah, thank you, Dr. Zhong. Yeah. I really like this presentation, especially when you were saying that this could be kind of like the missing variables in our previous traditional regressions. And I do remember that several years ago, the Professor Jason Cao firstly introduced the self-selections in the travel behavior analysis, which is impressive. And I do think currently people are talking about that, and machine learning models definitely will solve these kind of issues. But there could be one question from my perspective is currently I'm enjoying using machine learning models to do some research, and currently, but I do have some feeling some difficulties in using that. For example, is how could I interpret the result? In the traditional models, I can see that it's controlling by other variables. When there was one unit increase, there could be several increase in the outcome variables. But in the machine learning models, I cannot specify the numbers. Instead, what I can do is I can tell the orientations of this kind of trend or something like that. I think it could be useful for the researchers, but if we go to the practitioners, it will be kind of tricky for them to identify this kind of effect. So how do you think about these kind of dilemmas between the academia and the practice?
Yeah, very good question. So, of course, how to use or interpret the results, not mention the machine learning results. So I have a contact with a lot of policymakers here in China. They don't even understanding the conventional statistical results, right? And they don't care about modeling. They care about descriptive results, right? Because modeling, especially machine learning, right? So statistical modeling is already a black box for them. Okay. Machine learning, the box is even darker right? So I don't know, right? I feel there's a really growing divergence between the practice and the academia, especially in the application of machine learning. So in that sense, I think there's a growing importance to develop really straightforward and also easy to understand those kind of so-called the interpretable machine learning models, right? So for example here, this one is actually one of the example of interpretable machine learning model, right? You can clearly see how different factors interact, right? How stable they are, right? They are stably, right, constantly have this kind of structure and will have impact on people's behavior. So this is very straightforward for policymakers. So yeah, good question, but I don't think I have a really good answer for that, but just some observations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I totally agree with you. It seems that there could be kind of like the digital gap between the between the academia and the practice. Yeah, I do think the job for us is we should interpret this straightforward instead of using this kind of complex figures trying to tell the story, but we can use our like the simple sentence to describe the whole things, and that could be important for the practitioners. Yeah, I agree with you. And there could be another question following up. It's like about the model. Seems that you only use the random forest based machine learning algorithms. Do you consider to introduce other things like the gradient boosting decision tree or some maybe deep learning things? Try to make some kind of like the comparison.
Yeah, yeah, I was thinking about that, but I'm not sure because if this research is a theory driven, right, theory based research, we are interested in the interactions, right? The gradient boosting decision tree maybe is better for the nonlinear relationship, right? So if any theory that have a nonlinear prediction and nonlinear hypothesis cannot be tested by statistical modeling, yeah, the decision tree can be useful, right? So for here, I'm at least so far, this is one of the only algorithm I found that can do this search for stable and high order interactions. Right? So yeah, but one thing, but you raise a good point. So this has to be compared with traditional statistical models because researchers in public health, how they address the intersectionality issue is they use latent variable or they use latent class models, right, to address intersectionality issues. So maybe we have to compare this kind of machine learning model with the latent class models.
Cool. Thanks for the answer.
Hi, Altian, I would like to throw out one question for you. So first, I'm very interested in the intersectionality concept, and I think it is really important to us and to audience who use the emerging technologies and their methodologies in their research. So there are some research groups in MIT led by Catherine Ignacio, and I think they focuses on the data feminism to see how we, as a researcher, neglect some marginalized populations in data collections and data analytics. So they also use some data intersectionality concepts in their research. So I think that would be a great source for you as well. And also my question is, I think due to the data limitations, I guess sometimes we cannot capture all the background information needed for the modeling. So like you mentioned that it's a matter of how we predefine the subject. So maybe sometimes, even though we want to see some intersectionality concepts, but I guess sometimes we don't have the data to see.
Yeah.
So I'd like to hear more about your thoughts on that. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. So yeah, that's the problem, right? So if we use interviews, we probably can capture the most of those, all the details, right? Background information. But if we directly use quantitative method, using existing data, we may lose a lot of those context info. I guess probably the best way to do it is that just like how we do our research, right? How we design survey, we first conduct some focus group, right? To get most of the important concepts, important concerns from the focus group interviews, and then to collecting a structured survey data. So maybe we can do interview first with individuals and have those get most of those important factors, and then we collect survey data and do this kind of quantitative or machine learning modeling. Yeah, that's probably the best we can do.
Maybe using the mixed method with the quantitative
mixed
part
method.
and the quantitative part, and with using the machine learning, maybe makes it much more powerful to get the result.
Right. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. And any other questions? Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
I think, yeah, we're already at the time to wrap up. So yeah, I want to stop here. So if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to Dr. Zhong directly. Dr. Zhong, can you share your email address on the chat?
Yes. I mean, how can I share? Oops.
And if you miss
I'll
it,
type my.
please type.
Yeah. Okay, that's my email. Yeah, feel free
Thank
to
you.
reach out. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you,
And-
Kijin. Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Zhong, for the
No
wonderful talk.
problem.
And yeah,
You all
I'll
have a
post-
good day. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Have
have
a
a good
wonderful
weekend.
day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Visit Beijing, Kijin.
Yeah, sure.